and welcome to part 6 of the Freddy Dynomite Cafe Racer build. In this episode, we're starting on the wiring. This seems to be a real pain in the butt to most people out there, and you see a lot of people give up on their bikes because of the wiring. They find it really confusing, and in reality, when you look at the wiring diagram in the manual, I can see why people think that. We're going to make this easy though. I'll take this and chuck it. There's really not much to wiring, so in this episode we're going to focus on what was currently in the bike standard before we chop it up. We're going to explain everything. And really, electricity is pretty simple. I didn't know much about it, but you know what? I figured it out. Here's basically how electricity works. It all happens with the magic of strings. You see, everything on the bike is connected with these strings. They go from all the switches to the lights and stuff. And here's basically how everything works. First, say you're pushing the horn button. The horn button talks into the magic string like this. Beep the horn! And once I've given the command, it goes down the magic string, follows the path all across the bike to its destination. At the destination you get... Hello? Got it. So that's basically it. All these magic strings go all through your bike and do stuff just from talking just like that. No. Oh, who's that? Hey Eugene, how's it going?
Cousin Dynomite, what are you doing? I just detected a very strange disturbance in the electrical force. Don't tell me you're telling people again about your magic string theory of electricity.
What do you mean? Yeah, that's how it works. You've never heard of string theory before?
No, that is not at all what string theory is. Electronics is very, very important and very, very precise. You should not at all in any way be teaching anything about electronics to anybody.
Yeah, alright, fine. You want to come down and do it? You come down and do it yourself. Alright, see you soon. Bye. Alright, so it seems like I'm not qualified enough to do wiring. Anyway, okay, so I guess Eugene's going to come help us out with all this stuff. Till then, cue the intro! Alright, we're back. Thanks for sticking around. Now here's our special guest, Eugene Neutron Bomb. Take it away, Eugene. You show us how it's done.
Hi, I'm Eugene Neutron Bomb. How do I look, guys? I'm a little nervous. My cousin Freddy Dynomite here was definitely lucky in the gene lottery with the good looks. But me, I got the brains. So I'm going to help you guys out today and teach how this electronic stuff on this bike works. I've put together this little display to help us. And as you can see, there's no magic string anywhere. It's all wire. Wire transmits electricity. It comes from a ground and it goes to a positive. In between is what you have, and that's what uses the electricity. So I'm going to explain to you the horn button the way it's supposed to be, not magic string and tin cans. On your screen right now, I'm going to put a diagram of the horn button and how it works. Feel free to take a screenshot and print it out if you need it. Otherwise, here on our display board, as I was saying, this is the bike frame. The bike frame is grounded to a battery, so that's your negative side. All the positive comes in from the battery and through these fuses. So what we have to do is connect the two. In the case of the horn, we've got this brown wire that goes all the way to the horn. This is the horn, by the way, not a guy underneath the table. And the positive electricity goes directly to the horn all the time. The horn button is here on handlebars, and it's grounded to the frame. So when you push the button, it sends a ground all the way up this pink wire back to the horn, and it completes the circuit, and the horn beeps, just like this. See, there's no magic string anywhere. It's just electricity going from ground to the positive. That's all there is to it, guys. Okay guys, with my display model here, everything should be very clear to you right now. Well, maybe not. It may look a little intimidating with all these wires everywhere and everything laying all over, but let's go through the bike and you can kind of see where stuff is and what it is. Starting from the front, of course, we've got the dash and we've got our warning lights. We've got our ignition switch, which powers the whole bike and lets you start it. We've got the front brake lever with the brake switch. We've got the front throttle control with the on-off for the whole bike. Then we go down here, we've got the headlight, we've got the clutch, which also has a switch so we know when the clutch is on. We got our left-hand controls, which have the turn signals and the horn button on it, and also the high beam, low beam switch. There we go down, we've got our front turn signals. We've got the horn, remember that. Then we go further this way, and we've got our kickstand relay. We'll explain that more, but that's under your tank, as well as the blinker relay and the canceling unit. That's a really cool one. Wait till we get to that. We then have our 2 coils for your engine that provide sparks to the engine. We've got the starter on-off relay. And we keep going down. We've got our fuses. This bike didn't have a fuse box left. Somebody just hardwired these ones in. But that's alright. It does the same thing. We've got the starter solenoid, which is on the right side of your bike. Here in the diagram we don't have them because I couldn't put the engine up in here. But we've got the starter, we've got the generator, and we've got our points down here. Then at the bottom we've got the inputs from your points. We got the neutral switch, which is just under the engine, and the oil pressure switch. Then we have the kickstand switch, so we know when the kickstand's up and down. We got our rear brake switch. We got the headlight relay underneath our regulator and our TCI unit. And then going back, all we have left is our rear turn signals, our brake light, and our license plate light. That's all there is to it. Okay, so here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to go through all this wiring diagram and make sense of all of it. I'm going to break the bike up into 2 parts. The upper part, which is your lights and your turn signals and all that stuff, and then the lower part, which is the engine. We'll time mark everything down in the description so you can jump to whatever part's of interest to you. Okay, we're going to start off nice and simple. Up on your screen right now, you're going to see a wiring diagram for the front brake and the tail light. Here's how it works. First of all, the power comes in from the battery into the main fuse. That red wire goes directly to your ignition switch. And when you turn the switch, it'll power the rest of the fuses, but we'll get to that after. But for now, it goes there, but it also goes to your front brake switch. So we got live power all the time here, regardless if the ignition's on or not. Just by pushing the brake handle, even with nothing on the bike, the brake light comes on. The red wire with live power goes up to your brake switch. When you push the brake switch, it takes that power and lets it go through, back out to this green and yellow wire, which goes all the way back to the back of the bike, connects to this yellow wire here, and over to your brake lights. Now remember, a brake bulb has 2 filaments. It's got the low light one for your running lights, but also a brake circuit for the brake lights. So as you can see, just by pushing the brake handle, your brake light comes on, even though the ignition's off. Now, when you turn the ignition on, our main 12 volt coming into here now gets split and comes out of a blue wire and a brown wire. The brown wire goes back to power up the rest of the fuse box, but we'll get into that later. But the blue wire, that goes all the way back in, all the way down to the back of the bike, into your daytime running light and your license plate light. That's all there is to it. Alright, so that is the front brake switch and the running lights. Now, let's add the rear brakes to this too. Again, as I mentioned, when the main power comes into the switch, we talked about this brown wire coming out when the ignition's on. The brown wire goes back to your fuse box and charges up all your other circuits. In this case, we're looking at the signal circuit. The signal circuit comes out these ground wires, and one of the stops where it goes is to your rear brake switch. Again, see, we got our brown wire coming in here. This is stopped, and then we turn on the ignition to give power to our signal circuit. When you pull the brake switch, the brake light comes on because it completes a circuit from our brown positive to the yellow wire all the way to those bulbs. Okay, so that takes care of our brakes and our tail light. Now our next light would be the headlight. And here's how that one works. Again, when we turn our ignition on, our red power comes in, the brown comes out, and charges the rest of the fuse box. That sends live power on the red and yellow wire down to the headlight relay. Now what a relay does is it takes a positive and a negative and completes a circuit and clicks an electromagnet together. When that magnets click together, it allows a third or a fourth or however many prongs to send power through it. In this case, we have the power coming in on the red and yellow wire into our relay. We then have a black ground to ground it to the frame. We've got this white wire that goes to the diode pack. A diode pack is just to make sure that the signals don't get mixed up when different things are on the circuit and that ground stays a ground. And then finally, we have this blue and black wire. This blue and black wire, when the relay clicks on, allows a 12 volt to get sent through this blue and black wire all the way through the bike up to your headlight switch. When it gets to the headlight switch, depending which way you have it, it'll send that power all the way to the headlight switch, at which point, as you can see now, it's in low beam, so that blue and black wire comes in here and the switch lets the power go to the green wire. The green wire goes up to your headlight and that's your low beam. When you click your switch up, it no longer goes to the green wire, it goes to the yellow wire. The yellow wire goes up and powers your high beam light. But wait, it gets even more fun because that yellow wire is also connected to your dashboard lights. And you can see we've given 12 volt power to your high beam bulb in the dash. So it turns blue. Off and on. That's it for your headlights. Okay guys, now we're getting into the fun stuff, the flasher circuit. Really cool in this bike. Dynomite, are you taking notes?
Oh yeah, Eugene, I'm taking notes, don't worry about it.
Okay, we've got a whole bunch of components for the signal lights. First, we actually have our signal lights, their front, left and right, and our rear ones. And like we did before, those are all attached to ground. Then, we've got our turn switch on our handlebars. We've got our dash indicator light, showing that the blinkers are working. We even have our speedometer. And the final two big components, we've got our canceling unit, and we have the flasher relay itself. Now the canceling unit is what makes this really complicated. The idea is that when you put your blinkers on, that after either 10 seconds or that your bike moves 150 meters, it'll turn off the blinkers by itself. A lot of bikes don't have this, but the XJs do. So here's how it works. First of all, the basic wiring. From your front turn signal to your rear turn signal, there's a green wire. And on the opposite side, there's the same thing from the front one to the rear, and that one is brown. Then those two same wires are connected up to your dash light, which blinks on and off when your blinkers are on to remind you to turn them off if the self-canceling unit doesn't already do it for you. Also, these two wires are connected directly to your turn switch. So depending which way your turn switch is on, we're going to send power down these to light up the left side, or to this side to light up the right side. And at the same time, send power to the little bulb on the dash to light it up. It's kind of neat because when there's no power to a light, it acts like a ground. So depending which way we send positive power to it, it doesn't matter. We get a positive and a ground to that bulb and it flashes. So here's where the magic happens. Normally, your relay, your flasher relay in this case, now normally, like we talked before, a relay, in this case our flasher relay, takes a positive value, a negative value, and in the case of a flasher relay, it's a little bit different because there's a capacitor in there. So when the positive goes there, it fills up the capacitor, and then when it's full, it says, ugh, and it lets it go, and it shoots power out to your output. And that's how the flasher works. It fills up, shoots power through, and it stops. Fills up, shoots power through, and it's off. Shoots up, off, on, click, 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 and your lights blink. So, in this case, we'll forget about the rest for now, but our output from the flasher, our pulsating 12 volt, goes out of there, down on a brown and white wire, and back over to your switch. And here in your switch, like we said before, depending which way you have this pushed, it puts power to the right side or to the left side. And we're blinking. Now, the tricky part. How does all this happen with the self-canceling unit? Well, here it is. Okay, now here's where the magic happens with the canceling unit. And what the canceling unit does is after your blinkers have been on for 10 seconds or the bike goes for 150 meters, it'll turn off your signals in case you forget. Now the way it works, this is the cool part. First of all, we need the regular stuff. We need a ground. That's just grounded to the frame with a black wire. We need a positive, and it uses the same positive that the flasher unit uses. Coming in on a nice brown wire too. And then we have the signal wire that comes from the switch. It's yellow and red. Now what happens with this wire? When you turn the turn signal switch, there's a momentary switch in there also. So when you push it all the way over, it sends a ground back to here. Once you let it go, it releases it. It doesn't matter. That's just a signal to the canceling unit to start its job. And at that point, it starts its 10-second counter. First thing it does is it lets a ground wire leave here on a green and white wire. And this green and white wire goes all the way back up to your flasher unit, jumps over here and connects to the ground. That's what gives your flasher unit its ground. So now we have positive there, we have a signal coming from the canceling unit saying, let's put a ground there. So now our capacitor fills up and discharges and shoots a piece of power out to our switch and causes a blink. So that's all fine for now. Right now, with a 10-second counter, it'll keep doing this until the end of the 10 seconds, and then it says, stop sending that ground. And without a ground, the flasher unit will stop working. And your blinkers stop on their own. Now, if that wasn't cool enough, they've also added that part that after you go 150 meters, it'll also stop it. So to do that, the speedometer has a read switch on it, and it counts pulses as the motorcycle's moving down the road. It sends a signal back here. It sends down this green and white wire, also to the canceling unit. And in here, magic happens. Actually, it's just a little program that does either counting seconds or counts distance. And whenever the first one hits, either you do 150 meters or 10 seconds runs out, That's when we cut that negative again to the flasher unit and stops the flashing. That's all there is to it. Well, that's it for the turn signals. But while we're here, I'm going to mention something else. A lot of the XJ bikes don't have it. Some of the 750s do. For some reason, this 650 does also. That this bike actually has a rev limiter. That's right. If you look at the wires coming from the tachometer, most will only have 2 wires. Some will have 4. In this case, there's an extra orange and brown wire. The brown wire, of course, is positive, and the orange wire is what happens when your tachometer reaches 12,500 RPM, which is way too fast for these engines. What that does, the orange wire sends a signal back through the bike to one of the coils and a TCI unit and grounds them out. That causes the coil to stop working and your engine to half shut down. You'll only be running on 2 cylinders till you get back under 12,500 RPM, then it'll kick back in. Okay guys, so the last thing we're going to talk about on the upper part of the wiring is your dash warning lights. We got 4 lights up here. We've got our turn signals, which we've already talked about before. Remember how those work? We have the brown and the green wire come in here. Depending which way you're turning, one is a positive, one is a negative. It doesn't matter on the bulb, and it starts flashing that light the same as your flashers are flashing. The next one over is the oil pressure. The oil pressure light takes the red and yellow wire that has power to it and needs a ground like we talked about before. What the ground comes from is a black and red wire that works all the way back to the diode pack to make sure everything stays as a ground, and then works its way back to your oil pressure switch. When there's no pressure, the switch allows the ground to go through. But when you turn on your bike and you build up pressure, the switch turns off, doesn't allow the ground anymore, and that turns off your oil pressure light. Next up, we've got the high beam light. We also talked about that before, remember? When you switch this on and we send power to the high beam on the yellow wire also comes up to here and turns on this bulb for your high beams. Finally, the last one is a neutral switch. There's a brown wire coming in supplying it with the 12 volts, the positive, and then the light blue wire works its way all the way back to the neutral switch, which is the same thing. When the bike's in neutral, it lets the ground go through and turn that light on. Once you're in gear, it breaks that connection, no more ground, light goes off. Okay, now to demonstrate how all this stuff actually does work, we've got a ground here. So we're going to simulate stuff. First of all, well, the turn signal switches, although I'm having some trouble with my relay and it's not switching very well. But basically, when you turn signal switch, we're sending power up to the turn light. Next one over is the oil switch. So we put ground onto the oil. Boom! We're setting the ground so that the power goes through the light and lights it up. It's the same thing with the neutral switch. We add ground to it, and our neutral light lights up. And finally, high beam, like we were saying, when we push the switch on the high beam, sending power up the yellow wire and up to the light, we've got our high beam light too. Everything works. Now that we're done with the upper part, the lights and all that stuff, we can get into the engine electrical. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting. But basically, let's start with how our regulator works. The whole idea of the regulator is to take power coming in and convert it to 12 volts DC to power the bike and charge your battery as you're going. So what happens is on the XJ650, we have an alternator, not a generator, but an alternator. And the way the alternator works, we have a rotating mass containing an electromagnet. To charge that magnet, we've got 2 wires that come to your alternator, a brown one and a green and black one. A brown one providing the 12 volts from the fuses, and a green and black one from the regulator giving it ground. Those connect the brushes inside the alternator onto the center shaft of the alternator that holds your windings for the electromagnet and charge them up.
That causes a magnetic field. These windings spin around inside the case, around the stator magnets, which pick up the power being generated and then shoot out on the 3 wires coming out of here, alternating current. 3 white wires, doesn't matter which one, they're all the exact same thing. Those 3 white wires come back and connect into your regulator. Now what the regulator does is take this alternating current that goes plus minus, plus minus, plus minus, plus minus, which doesn't work on a bike, and converts it to direct current, a straight plus and a straight negative. It also at that point regulates the voltage coming out, so you don't have big spikes that could fry your system. It keeps everything at the right voltage coming out. The power generated goes back up through the red wire, back to your battery, and starts charging when your motorcycle is running. Our next item up is our TCI unit. This is what controls the spark to your engine to fire off your spark plugs when they're supposed to be fired off. Kind of the brains of the whole bike. Now, there's a bunch of pins on the side here. I'm just going to kind of explain what the pins are. It all starts from your pickup coil on the side of your engine. As your engine turns, there's a couple magnets in here that tell the TCI where your pistons are, in what position, especially with the main idea of knowing exactly when one of your pistons is at top dead center and it's time to send a spark to it. So these 2 signals get sent into this lower plug, coming in on orange and gray wires, and the ground also coming from those 3 wires. The only other thing coming into this lower plug is a black and white wire that's connected back to the kickstand switch. We'll talk about this more after, but basically if the kickstand is down and the bike is in gear, we're going to send the ground back to the TCI, and that's going to shut it down so that you can't start your bike when it's in gear. So these signals come into the TCI unit, it reads it, it figures out what's supposed to be fired when. We've got a red and white wire coming in for the main power for it, we've got a ground coming in for it, and then when the pickup coils let the TCI know when to fire, it says alright, and it sends a ground through the orange and gray wire here up to your coils. Keeping in mind that on the XJ650, the coils are always powered. When you turn on the ignition, they have 12 volts at them. So the TCI is just sending a ground to it and saying, fire. Now you might be wondering, we've got 2 coils, 4 spark plugs. How does it fire each one individually? Well, it doesn't. The XJ650 works on a wasted spark system. Basically, one coil handles pistons 2 and 3, and the other one handles pistons 1 and 4. So what happens on an engine is you have one piston that's up on a compression stroke and ready to be ignited, while the other one is also at top dead center on the exhaust stroke. On a wasted spark system, they both fire at the same time. The one on the exhaust stroke doesn't do anything because the valves are open, there's no gas. The one on the compression stroke ignites the gas and goes. So by wasted spark, they mean one is being used, the other one's wasted. So by sending 2 signals, pistons 2 and 3 spark plugs will fire at the same time, only one being on compression stroke, and pistons 1 and 4, when it's their turn, will also fire at the same time, only igniting the one that's on compression stroke. Okay guys, so the last really complicated one we have is our starter circuit. You thought the turn signal one was hard. This one's even more interesting. What are the conditions we need for the XJ bike to start? Well, it starts with the kickstand. If the kickstand is down and the bike is in neutral, it will start. Doesn't matter about the clutch switch or anything else. But if the kickstand is down and the bike is not neutral, there's no way this bike is going to start. So that leaves us with the other option of the kickstand being up and the bike's in neutral, it'll start. If the kickstand is up and the bike is not in neutral, as long as you have the clutch pulled in, it's going to start also. So let's figure out how all this stuff goes together. Here's the components we need for our starter circuit. We need our clutch. We need our kickstand. It has a switch on it. Now this switch, if the kickstand is up, we have a ground. If the kickstand is down, there's no ground. We need our neutral switch. Again, if the bike is in neutral, we have a ground. If it's in gear, we don't have a ground. Then we also have our TCI is going to be part of this. We have a side stand relay. We have a starter on-off relay. Then we have our starter solenoid. And we have our starter. And that's all the basics. So how are we going to connect this all together? Let's work this backwards. It's a little easier to think of it that way. A starter is grounded to the engine. All it needs is 12 volts to come to it. So our starter solenoid can send 12 volts to our starter. Where does it get it from? The relay always has an input and output. The starter solenoid is actually attached right to the battery. So that's our 12 volts coming in. Now, as usual, a relay takes an input and puts out to the output, and in between we've got to give it a signal to bridge that gap. In this case, we have two wires. We've got a blue and white one that goes to our starter button. When we push that button, we're putting a ground to that blue and white wire into our starter solenoid, which means the only thing left we need is 12 volts to come in to this side. That 12 volts is going to be supplied by the starter on-off relay. So now what are the conditions for our starter on-off relay to be active? The same thing, our output is 12 volts, our input also 12 volts from a red and white wire, and we have to bridge the gap. Now to bridge this gap, there's two more pins on this. Either one of these pins gets a ground or a negative, that starter solenoid is going to click and we're going to send power through. So how are we going to get ground to these two pins on the on-off relay? Well, the first one comes in from this blue wire, which goes to our neutral switch. We'll go along here, and along the way it actually goes to our dash, to the neutral light, which we discussed before, and then down to the neutral switch, which, as we mentioned, when the bike is in gear, there's no ground. When the bike is in neutral, we have a ground. So in this case, if the bike is in neutral, we have a ground coming all the way to our starter on-off solenoid, and we're good to go. Regardless if the kickstand's up or down, it doesn't matter. We have a bridge here, we can send 12 volts to our solenoid, push the button, and they're going to start. The other option to get a ground is from this black and yellow wire that goes over to our clutch switch. And all we need coming into our clutch switch is a ground. When we pull our clutch, we'll send a ground up to our starter on-off solenoid and bridge the gap. The tricky part is where this comes in. To get a ground here, one of two conditions have to be met. Either the side stand is up, and that gives us a ground, or we're neutral, ground. So this actually comes in on a yellow wire for the neutral, actually from the diode pack, not the actual switch, but it's all connected in the end. That comes over, connects to here. So again, if in neutral, it doesn't matter if you pull the clutch lever, because we already have a ground on this side from neutral, but we could. And then from the kickstand switch, remember, if the kickstand is up, we have a ground. So as long as the kickstand is up, we can go here too. And when you pull in the clutch, we'll get a ground either from the kickstand or from the neutral switch, or both, it doesn't matter. We'll get a ground here and we can kick off our starter solenoid. So what is this side stand relay for? Well, as usual, it takes an input to charge it up of 12 volts coming in from the red and white wire. We've got a ground coming into it. We need a tripping signal in here, and it requires a negative. So this negative will come from here. So again, if our side stand is down, we have no negative from here. So we don't get a negative here, no negative here. Same thing as if we're in gear, we have no negative. So if we're in gear and no side stand, no negative can get to here. So the relay won't kick off. The side stand relay will receive a ground, causing the relay to click off, and we're going to send a ground via this black and white wire over to the TCI. What this does is it disables the TCI. And that's what happens when you're driving along and your bike's in gear and you put the kickstand down. We lose the ground, it clicks off the relay and kills your TCI, and your bike dies. Hope that made sense.
Okay, that's all the electronics for the engine. Let's do a big picture of what happens when you go to start. First thing you do, there's constant power coming up to your ignition switch, you turn it on. That powers up your coils, powers up your TCI, and goes through the circuit to check for your kickstand, your neutral switch, your clutch switch, everything. If everything checks in, our stand relay is active, our starter on-off relay is active, and we're putting power down to the solenoid. Next thing you do, you push the button. We send current here to the starter solenoid to activate it. Our 12 volt from the battery goes through the solenoid, off to the starter solenoid. The starter spins your engine. Now that your engine's spinning, your pickup coil is going to send signals at every top dead center back to the TCI, telling it to send a signal to your coils, to fire off your coils, and send a spark to your engine, igniting the gas and air mixture and getting your engine to start. Once it's starting, your alternator starts spinning and starts pushing power back to your regulator and back to your batteries, start charging, and everything's working great. The last thing we're going to talk about is the fuses. There's 4 of them. There's the main one, the ignition, the signal, and the headlight. We're just going to go through each fuse and I'll tell you what's attached to them. That way if something's having a problem, you have an idea what fuse to look for or what circuit it's in. The first one's the main fuse. The main fuse is the only one that's connected directly to the battery. With the main fuse, there's a big red wire that goes from there right to the ignition switch, and when you turn the ignition switch, it feeds a brown wire back to the rest of the fuses. The only other place it goes is to your front brake switch, the one on your handlebar. As we talked about before, that even with the bike off, you can put the brakes on and the brake light will turn on. I guess that's a safety feature. The next one is the ignition fuse. You can tell that one because it has red and white wires going to it. The fuse is fed directly from the ignition switch, and the red and white wire then goes directly to your kill switch for your engine. When it's flipped on, it'll immediately power the coils, the side stand relay, the starter on-off relay, and the TCI unit, and even your oil check light. So as the name states, ignition fuse is for all your ignition stuff when you're about to start your bike. The third one's the easiest one. That's the one with the red and yellow wire. That is your headlight fuse. The headlight fuse only does one thing. Just powers up your headlight relay. That's it, nothing else is on that. And finally, the last one is the signal fuse. You can tell that one with the brown wires going to it. As the name denotes, it's for your signal stuff. It powers up your canceling unit, it covers up your flasher relay, it powers up the horn, the rear brake switch, the tachometer, and the neutral light. So if you're having trouble somewhere with something not working, hopefully these fuse explanations will explain where to look and what circuit. And that's basically it. That's your motorcycle wiring harness as it is on the XJ650. A little less complicated once you break it down in little parts and you don't look at this big mess of wiring. If you're not sure, just get the wiring diagram out of the book, even though he said it wasn't worth anything, and trace your wires around. Follow the circuit, figure out what it does, and you can find the problem. And now that Dynomite over here knows what all the parts do, we can work on putting together a simplified wire diagram for the Cafe Racer build. Back to you, Cousin Dynomite.
Alright, thanks a lot, Eugene, for explaining all that to us. And actually, all kidding aside, I hope you guys have all learned something from this. If you look in the links below, I'll have this all time coded so you can skip to whatever part you need to review. Again, the idea of today's episode was to give an idea of how the XJ650 wiring works stock. We're going to take what we learned today and apply it so that when we make our simple wiring diagram for the cafe racer, we know what we need to keep and what we can discard. So that wraps it up for today's episode, episode 6, the wiring diagram of the Freddy Dynomite cafe racer build. And remember, please hit the subscribe button down below and the link and the bell and everything so you can keep up with all the new videos coming out. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks a lot and see you in the next episode.